Here at Burdine Jewelry, we have the incredible luxury of having 3 watchmakers as part of our staff. Today I'm joined by one of them, Steve. Thank you so much for joining me.
Sure.
To talk a little bit about watches and what he thinks of them, and of course, what differentiates a good versus a bad watch. So let's get right into it. So Steve, thank you so much again for joining me. I guess before we start anything, maybe let's get into a little bit of your experiences, how you got into watches, what made you become a watchmaker, all that kind of good stuff.
Okay. I was very interested in watches from probably 8 years old. I never had an epiphany kind of moment, like where the skies opened and I was like, I have to be a watchmaker. I liked anything that was mechanical. So I was into cameras, I was into watches. And honestly, I didn't care what was inside it and what made it go. It was a cool thing to put on my wrist. And I think the first time that I got a watch or encountered a watch that made me think a little bit about what was inside it was when I found an Accutron in a thrift store. And it was like from '67. It was a railroad approved kind of hidden lug kind of thing.
Okay.
And still, that's probably my favorite watch. And then I did all kinds of other things. I went to college. I did a bunch of different jobs, and then ended up in Minneapolis. And discovered that there was a watchmaking school 10 miles down the road, a Wo-Step school. And I was looking for something to do, so that's what I did.
Okay, so I guess it kind of found you as opposed to you going out and searching for it.
Yeah.
And then I guess once you went to school, did you kind of refine your studies into a specific area, or was there anything that I guess caught your attention for the most part, or it was just kind of you just enjoyed the watch, the idea of dissecting kind of mechanical things, and watches was the next natural pursuit?
Yeah. I think it's a generalist kind of thing. When I went into school, I imagined I would be, by the time I got out of school, I'd be doing all kinds of kind of high horology kind of stuff.
Sure.
And that really it indicates a misunderstanding of how deep that subject is, because it's 2 years.
Right.
2 years is enough to make you not dangerous on some pretty common stuff. And still dangerous probably on some other stuff. Like your training's not over when you get out of school.
Right.
And if people who understand that hire you, then you spend the next 10 years getting a lot better at stuff.
Right. I guess we were just talking about this off camera, right? This idea of a master watchmaker,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
it's just kind of
Yeah.
funny. Right. Like after 2 years, like realistically, I remember we took that IWC, what's it called, like training of like disassembling watches, and I was like, oh, I'm so good, look at me. And like, meanwhile, not paying any attention to like scratching bridges or like any of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It takes a fine hand to actually take care of watches. And I guess out of school from there, where did you kind of land? Or was it like a watchmaking position working for a brand, a company, or anything like that?
I came to the Chicago area and I worked for a Rolex ORJ straight out of school.
Wow. Okay. So I guess Rolex was your first bid in watchmaking.
Yep. And Rolex at that point, they were funding the school, those kinds of Wo-Step schools. The vice president of after sales service would make visits and was a very nice guy. So like Rolex did a lot to make watchmakers get out of school loving Rolex, which I think they probably would have to some extent, no matter what. But you get out of school with a soft spot for people who trained you, and
Sure. How
so I was
fund you
happy to
and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And how long did you work for Rolex for?
I worked for the ORJ for 14 and a half years.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. I guess my question is, having worked on Rolex and I assume other brands as well, right? What would you say is kind of the main quality differentiators between, like, let's say a Rolex watch versus something else?
A lot of it to me has to do with like case design. I know movements are the first thing that people think of when they think of high-end watches. But the case is where a lot of manufacturers will let things slide. And there's a lot of details to case design that I think brands get really wrong. And it's a disservice to customers. Like if they have a crown and case tube set up that's easy to strip, they have a giant crown and very fine threads.
Okay.
Then somebody just ends up strong arming the threads out, and then the brand charges them to fix it. Okay. And Rolex doesn't. Everything is solid. Everything's rock solid in the case design, which is, I guess, not surprising considering they invented it was the whole Oyster Perpetual from 1930s. So their cases I respect a lot. Their bracelets actually weren't always great, and a lot of watch brands didn't always make great. It was an afterthought for a lot of years. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I think people started realizing that they should probably make a decent bracelet to put on a good watch. And now Rolex bracelets, I don't think there's anything in the price range of a Rolex that's quite as good as a Rolex bracelet.
Yeah, I think only maybe like a handful of brands I can really say, and brands are catching up. To be fair, I think IWC does a decent job. I think Omega probably does an okay job, but yeah, there's no question about it. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Rolex acquired in the '90s Gay Frere, which is probably the most historic bracelet maker, and since then all they've been doing is going from strength to strength, upgrading each and every component. I mean, you look at a Submariner from like the 1950s versus today, right? The design is very similar, but everything about that watch today is like a souped up version of the 1950s, right? The luminescence is better, the dial is better, the case is better, the bracelet is better, the micro adjustment in the bracelet, the movement is more accurate, longer power reserve, the whole nine. So, I mean, like one thing I think that, and you touched on this, right, is like the case, the bracelet gets improved. But I guess in terms of the movement, right, and that's something I always found impressive, and I would classify Rolex as the best brand, or one of the best brands in the world, certainly, at least in their genre, the sports watch genre, just because, I mean, you think about it, the rates of failure that they don't experience, right? Making over 1 million watches a year, the accuracy they're able to achieve, pretty much across the board at +2, -2 seconds for all of their watches, it's nothing short of extremely remarkable in my opinion.
And one thing that Rolex that kind of characterizes their movements, I think, is how each iteration of the movement, each generation is radically better than the last. And a lot of other, for years there was so much ETA everywhere. And if you look at one of the base movements from the 60s and then an ETA 2892 from 2000 or something, it's very, very, very similar. And Rolex, you wouldn't recognize it as having been made by the same company. And in particular, so the 15 calibers were quirky and tricky to work on sometimes. In the 30s, that's probably my least favorite Rolex caliber because it was designed during the quartz crisis. It shares some dial side components with the Oyster quartz because at that point they wanted to hedge their bets because they weren't exactly sure what was going to happen. And then the 31, which is one of the best ones I think ever made. But the 32, it feels like an order of magnitude difference between the 32 and the 31 in terms of how things fit together, in terms of like how obviously precise the manufacturing is. Ridiculous. And so many details in a Rolex movement are clearly there only to make servicing it easier, which is something that I've never seen in any other sort of movement. Maybe now, currently, a Richemont movement might have these features, but in Rolex, it's like the people designing it knew someone was going to take out this screw, and they wanted to make their life a little easier.
Really?
And it's cool to see those details, and some of them I didn't notice on the 32 until like the third time through it. I'm like, oh, I didn't notice that this screw recess is wide enough to use any one of 3 different screwdrivers instead of a single.
Right. So it's kind of like foolproof in the way that it's engineered and designed, so that kind of like the future serviceability is easier, so to speak.
Yeah, and in terms of decorating, like traditionally the stuff you saw when you opened the watch was decorated, and the undersides of bridges weren't. And then brands like Patek would decorate everything. And a 32 is like the Patek. Like you take apart the setting mechanism and everything's got a perfect, beautiful grained finish on it. And this is Rolex, and it's a $10,000 watch.
Right.
So it's moved that movement to me, and I've never taken apart a modern Patek or any Patek really. So there's things in there that maybe I don't know about. But from what I can see, Rolex has really upped the game movement-wise. Functionally, I mean, they're improving that way too. They've got a bearing on the oscillating weight now, which is, I think, a big deal, at least for like service intervals and for like durability. So yeah. They put a lot of thought into all the stuff they design.
That's awesome.
Which is nice to see.
Yeah, and again, it's kind of this idea of going strength to strength, always just improving their product. I guess moving away from Rolex, right? Like in terms of like watches specifically, is there like hallmarks or quality components that you look for in a good versus kind of a bad watch, or it just kind of general really varies from watch to watch?
Well, I'd go back to bracelets. That there are details in bracelets that nobody does unless it's really a high quality watch. Like if it's a person the person designing realizes that a watch could fall off if they use the same old screw and instead they design something else. And so there are a few brands that are standouts there, like a lot of Richemont brands. Says the traditional screw is fine if it's installed correctly, but over time there are torquing effects on it because of the way the links pivot that will loosen it. And if you look at a lot of Richemont brands, or you look at AP or Omega, they're using systems that isolate almost completely the screw from the link movement. So it's not going to fall off.
Right.
So that, you'll never see a bad watch with that kind of system in it. Spring bars are a big deal. Like everyone, I think people think of spring bars as a thing that's the same in a Rolex as it is if you go to eBay. In fact, I think I read an article on Hodinkee or something that actually kind of suggested this. And it's not true at all. And they're not expensive, good spring bars, but good spring bars, there's a huge difference. And so I'm allergic to terrible spring bars, and I don't. You'll see watches come in, $50,000 watches with a 35-cent horrible spring bar in it. And so it's as if it doesn't matter, but it does matter as soon, then the watch comes off and you're standing on the sidewalk, it matters quite a bit. So
it's funny because, like, I guess as a watchmaker, and these are pretty, again, we didn't pre-plan this, kind of you're looking at maybe even some of the components I wouldn't expect, right? And I guess that's kind of the watchmaker's touch, is like you look at things that maybe people would never like, spring bars being an afterthought, bracelets being like, okay, you just throw it on your wrist, who cares? It's like, it's just about user experience more than anything. But yeah, I guess that's kind of interesting. And this is kind of going into my next question, is in terms of like watchmaking trends, right? We've seen a lot of people and a lot of brands work on their bracelets, work on their systems. Is this like something that you like to see more brands focus on, or are there other trends maybe that you'd like to see in the watch industry itself?
For sure, like the bracelet trend is great. Like there's so many watches that I really never saw when I was working in more of a Rolex-oriented store that I see now, and it's fun to encounter all the ways you can take a link out with one tool. And Richemont it seems like Richemont is really at the forefront of that. Like so many Richemont brands are doing it. I think Cliched Original has some interesting link designs that are easy to work with. So yeah, I want to see brands focus on kind of user interface stuff, because it's easy for brands to just get wrapped up in geeking out about their own movements, and to forget about people wearing the watch.
Yeah.
And how well is it going to stay water resistant? How long is it going to go between services? That kind of thing. And I think that's where most of the technical gain is going to be made going forward in watch movements, is in service interval stuff. Because if you were to graph, the technological improvement of movements over the last 400 years, we're plateauing.
Yeah.
Not much has changed for a long time, and they come up with kind of new ways to do things, but the end result is not noticeable when you're wearing it. It reads the same time as it would some other way. So the movement is increasingly, like, there's so many spectacular things to see through the back of a watch, and I think that's what the main value of having a movement like that is. And I don't know enough people buying those watches personally to know whether they expect better timekeeping from a watch like that.
Yeah.
I know I've encountered people in my old job that would come in and be indignant because they'd spent $60,000 on a Patek and it didn't keep better time than the Rolex.
Right.
And just to me, there was a real misunderstanding of what they're paying for.
Right, exactly.
When they put that money down.
Yeah, and I guess kind of to your point, right, and this is something I've discussed in prior videos, is it's kind of hard to experience real, true innovation in the watch industry, right? It's a pretty old industry, almost 400 plus years now at this point. I mean, if you go back to kind of clock towers, we're talking thousands of years old now, right? And I mean, in most wristwatches, they've kind of perfected, I guess, most 90+% of watches use a Swiss lever, some form of the Swiss lever escapement, just because it's so, kind of easy to regulate and all that kind of good stuff. But I guess, like, even, you look at watch brands, Richemont comes into mind, right, where you have, 120-hour power reserves, it's almost 5 days, and then you have the levels of accuracy they're able to achieve. Do you think that we're going to see less and less innovation in that regard, just because there's not much more that we can do, or do you think there's still kind of things that brands can push or strive to achieve in the future?
That's a good question. I don't know how much more power reserve they can get easily.
Right. Because then it becomes an accuracy issue, right? The outflow of power.
Yeah, the isochronism problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious about, like, things like Ulysse Nardin's, some of their constant force escapements, and I really want to, like, time one out because I don't really know. It's awesome. Like when I first saw a diagram
Sure.
of it in school, I was like, that's the most amazing thing I've seen. But how does it work?
Yeah,
You know,
and what's
in
the
the real world?
practicality of it and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, space is a real issue in a watch when it comes to making it run that long. There was a brand a few years ago that I remember trying to make like a 30-day power reserve watch by using big coil springs that would be compressed. And I wonder if you remember this or remember what the name of the brand was.
I know Longo tried it. There was Longo Vacheron did a 65-day, but that's kind of they're playing on the what's it called, the beat rate of the actual watch itself. But I don't remember.
Or I think it might
the only one
actually
I know
have
is
been
Longo.
a torsion bar, like where
Okay.
they're twisting a rod basically to use it as a mainspring. And
Interesting.
I think their problem was harnessing that much power inside a watch case. Like you have to safely contain it.
Oh, it might be Jacob and Co. I think
Maybe.
so. I think it was Jacob and Co. They had essentially barrels, and they got coiled, and it was like a 31-day power reserve, something crazy like that.
Yeah. So I think it's the easiest way to do it is just to increase, like to throw more barrels in.
Yes.
And you could do it by putting a really, really powerful mainspring in, but then you have the problem of how do you make a delicate mechanism that won't break if you're trying to contain that power. So I don't know. And I've seen the 30-day Longa, and it's not the slimmest
Yeah. No,
watch
not
in
at
the
all.
world. So it's impressive, but it's
Impractical.
maybe not practical. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about the isochronism problem. Like that could be an issue. Like, because a lot of manually wound watches that have 8-day reserves, when you wind them fully for the first time, for the first 10 minutes, it'll knock, meaning the balance amplitude is so high that it's hitting stuff at the end of its travel that it shouldn't be hitting, and the result is that it could be gaining 3,000 seconds a day, or more, like much more. Like you could gain 20 minutes.
In those
In a day.
in those first 10 minutes, just
Yeah.
because of those.
In the first 10 minutes, you could gain a minute, maybe.
Wow. Okay.
And so that there's a tolerance for that I've learned among some brands, or a spec, like how long can it do that? How long is it permissible for it to run that fast?
Sure.
Which is kind of a fact of life if you're going to do it. But I think engineering something that's going to run that long and be really, really good the whole time is probably difficult.
Awesome. I guess in terms of watches themselves, right, and this will be the last question before we wrap up, is there like a specific genre that you enjoy collecting, just kind of more lighthearted, right? Is it like sports watches, dress watches? What is it like, I guess, about modern watches? Or do you even collect them at all?
Not a lot.
Yeah.
Not a lot. In fact,
All that.
in the last 5 years, there was a point where I went 2 years without wearing a watch. Partly to see what it was like, partly because I was refinishing a lot, and I don't want to wear one while I'm refinishing.
Yeah.
And then I got a smartwatch, which I never thought I would do, and it was so useful that I kind of quit wearing mechanical stuff. But I still have a sweet spot for Accutrons.
Okay.
Or as.
And I would love, like, one of my wishes come true would be if a brand started making a tuning fork movement again. And it should get easier and easier with like Liga technology and being able to make things out of silicon easily. Maybe not easily, but it should get cheaper and cheaper. And I would collect. I've got a few of them already, Accutrons and Accutron spares, and I really think I should buy an Omega tuning fork movement at some point if I can find one, a Speedmaster.
Yeah.
If they exist, I'll have to rope you in for finding one. But I like quirky stuff for the most part. Like, I'm not so concerned with I've never bought a watch thinking, oh, this is going to be slightly more accurate.
Yeah.
It's always what it says to me when I look at it, and it's the way it started out for me. Like I would go over Sears catalogs over looking at all the watches, thinking, okay, if I could buy a watch on this page, which one? And I didn't give a second thought to if it had a battery or not. So at heart, I think I'm still the same way. Like I can appreciate a movement, but if I'm going to buy a watch, it's one that I see and it's
gonna speak to you.
grabs me.
Yeah. It's gonna
Yeah.
speak to you.
In fact, the one I have on now, I got because I didn't like it when I first saw it. And then I kind of came around to it. And then eventually I loved it, but I still didn't like the bezel color. Like I'll never like the bezel color,
Yeah.
but I still love it. And that's that's kind of how I know that that's the watch for me, is that I have some problems with it, but it doesn't change the fact that I really want it.
That's awesome.
You know?
Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much again for joining me. I appreciate it. Guys, if you have any questions for Steve, leave them down in the comments below. Maybe if you want to answer a couple, or we can always do a follow-up video if you guys enjoyed this. Of course, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. And Steve, thank you so much again for joining me.
Yep, you're welcome.
Really appreciate it. Guys, we'll see you all in the next one.